Genesis chapter 10 gives us a list of Noah's descendants. And then chapter 11 gives us the account of the Tower of Babel, and then the list of descendants that leads up to Abram. And the challenge with this or with any text is this: what does it say? What does it mean? And what is the connection to us? Because some people would read and say, well, this has got nothing to do with me. What's it say? What's it mean? How does it connect? So let's read Genesis 10:32 and following. These are the clans of Noah's sons according to their lines of descent within their nations. From these the nations spread out over the earth after the flood. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. And as men moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. And then they said, come, let's build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the men were building. And the Lord said, if as one people speaking the same language they've begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and confuse their language so they will not understand each other. And so the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That's why it's called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. And from there the Lord scattered them over the over the face of the whole earth. So we read that text. What does it say? Well, Noah had kids, and they had kids, and they had kids, and some of them settled here, and they built this tower, and God confused their language, and so that's where we get all the languages of the earth from. Right? So it says, that's what it means. How does it connect with us? Well, that's where languages come from. Okay? Thanks, Pastor. Have a good afternoon. Well, as you might guess, not so fast. A couple things from this. You'll note, first of all, that all of the nations of the earth, they descend from Noah. All the nations of the earth descend from Noah. That means there's one race. One race. There's not multiple races, there's one race. There's different languages, there's different locations, different priorities, different cultures, but not different races. Right? There is one race, it's the human race, all goes back to Noah. Now, there might be cultural prejudices, right? Value prejudices, moral prejudices, ethical prejudices. But there really isn't anything such thing as racial prejudice. Right? It's a construct that hides the real issues. That we differ from each other in what we value, in what we believe is true, what we believe is moral, and what we believe is ethical. We differ with each other on how life is supposed to be lived and who's in charge. That's the prejudice. There's differences. So we don't have to accept. When I say we, I just mean people in general, not necessarily us or our church, just people in general. We do not have to accept what we are fed in a dominant culture and the definitions of terms. So in case you're missing this, I reject outright the topic and the subject of racism. Now, if you want to talk prejudice about values, about truth, yeah, I don't have a whole lot of time for cultures and constructs that are based on evil. I have no time for Nazi Germany. Zero. Right? Now we're talking divisions over something that really matters. Race doesn't work. Anyway, so there's one connection. Secondly, how did we get where we are today? How did we get in our Russia and our Ukraines? How do we get to our Arabs and our Israelis? How does this all happen? Well, chapter 11 says that the whole world had one language and a common speech. But if you read chapter 10, and you go back to verse 5, it says, well, here's where the maritime peoples, they spread out, the clans with their nations, each with their own language. If you read chapter 10, verse 20, it talks about the sons of Ham by their clans and their languages. And in chapter 10, verse 31, the sons of Shem by their clans and their languages. And then you get to chapter 11, it says, but the whole world had one common language. Well, what's going on here? Well, what's going on here is chapter 11 circles back into chapter 10 and explains why these people all had a separate language. Right? Circles back to that language issue, and it circles back to one other issue. If you go back to chapter 10, verse 25, it says, 2 sons were born to Eber. One was named Peleg because in his time the earth was divided. Right? Separation. Now, some people read that and go, oh, that's when the tectonic plates shifted and, Pangea broke up and we got the North America and all these continents moved around. No. This is people being divided. This is divisions among the earth and the inhabitants of the earth. This is when things started to just really go, explode, and people got divided. So chapter 11 is explaining how do we get to where we are today. Different groups of people, different languages, pursuing different values, different cultures. So there's something that divides the human race. Right? There's something that divides the human race. Something separates us, leads us into clashes and wars and envies and struggle. And the assumption is it's language, if you read this chapter just real quick. But that is wrong. It is not language that divides us. It is something far more basic and far deeper. We'll come back to that. You will note that all of Adam's or Noah's descendants, right? There's this list in chapter 10, but there's one that gets mentioned. One in particular. His name is Nimrod. So if you go back to chapter 10, verse 8, I want to read verses 8 through 12. So one of Noah's sons, right, is Ham. Ham has a son by the name of Cush. Chapter 8 says Cush is the father of Nimrod. So Nimrod is Noah's great-great-grandson. Cush was the father of Nimrod, verse 8, chapter 10, who grew to be a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That's why it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. Verse 10, the first centers of his kingdom were Babylon, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh, and Shinar. And from that land he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ir, Calah, and Rezin, which is between Nineveh and Calah, that is the great city. Here's Nimrod gets introduced to us in this list of nations. He's a mighty warrior, he's a hunter, he's a king, right? He has a domain. He's built city after city. He's got a realm, right? Mighty guy, he can hunt, he can fight, and he builds cities. Here's an individual who has personal power, right? Personally, he's a powerful man, but he also has political power. Right? He has a realm. Multiple cities are under this great guy by the name of Nimrod. In case you're wondering where that's at, it's ancient Iraq and Syria. And we're told that the first place was Babylon. Right? That's where Nimrod sets out, and that's the first place he establishes with his personal and his political power. And so chapter 11 picks up, right? Circles back to that moment, and it says, everybody had the same language. And men moved east where they found a plain in Shinar, that is Babylonia, right? They found a place and they settled there. That is, if you are interested in contemporary geography, this place is about 50 miles directly south of the city today known as Baghdad. That's where it's at, 50 miles between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. But here is this man and this group of people who settle in this area, and what do? They start building. And they build what? For themselves. Let's build for ourselves a city, and let's make a name for ourselves. Right? The text is very clear what the motive is behind this group of people. They're concerned about them. And they're going to establish security for themselves. Let's build a city. Let's build a tower that reaches up to heaven so that we aren't scattered over the whole earth. We want security. We don't want to be spread out and vulnerable. We're going to get together. This is what we're going to do, and we're going to solve this issue. They are driven by two things, pride and fear. right? They want to make a name for themselves. They don't want to be an average Joe, right? They want to be known. They want to be significant. They want to be powerful. Their meaning in their life is going to come from themselves and what they do. But they're also driven by fear. If we don't, what's going to happen to us if we don't do this? We're going to be like everybody else. We're going to be scattered. We're going to be vulnerable. No, we're going to consolidate and we're going to control out of pride and fear. So rather than living under the covenant that God has already provided for Noah, right? Saying, hey, you be fruitful, you multiply, you fill the earth, right? Get out there, scatter, pioneer. What do? They consolidate. Rather than living under the covenant that God gave them, they want to build a place with this tower that leads to heaven. Their interpretation for the name of their city is the gate of heaven, right? That's what they call it. There's a play on words. Babel means the gate of heaven. And God is going to rename them Babel, a place of confusion. Rather than fill the earth, they are going to, out of fear for their own safety, they're going to achieve their own protection. Where God said, I give them all, it's all yours, right? I give everything there is for food, you spread out, you fill the earth. God told them that 3 times after the flood. This is what I want you to do. But we see them doing what? The exact opposite. Let's pause here for a moment and let's entertain this. When humanity builds a city, or when a human being pursues this kind of life, when we organize this way in arrogance, for ourselves, for our own security, to solve the issues of the curse, to rebel against the boundaries that God has already set, to have our realm and our domain, and it's not out of a relationship with God. It's not because God said it, but it's achieved by human effort. We are trusting ourselves. It immediately becomes, in us we trust. The very opposite of what is written on the money of the United States of America. Not in God we trust. It's in us we trust. Let me say that again. When we build a city or we pursue a life of our own in our arrogance for ourselves and our security, to solve the curse, to rebel against the boundaries of God, to have our realm and our domain, and it's not from a relationship with God. It's not like God said, this is what I want you to do, and this is where I want you to go. But we achieve it by our efforts. We're trusting ourselves. We are now living a life of in us we trust. And here's this group of people. They're going to glorify and they're going to fortify themselves by their self-effort. And they're saying, come on. You notice in verse 3, come, let's do this. Verse 4, come, let's do this. And somebody is driving this. There is this group control and this group pressure. You come, this is what we're going to do. We'll tell you what you're going to do. We'll tell you how we're going to do it. And we'll tell you what the goals are, right? We're going to put it all in place. Come on, let's do this. This control and this pressure where we, or I control my future. I control my fortune. I control my power. Now, what does God do about this? What does God think of this kind of life and this kind of pursuit? Well, you get down to verse 5 and it says the Lord came down to see this, right? God sees this. This is not done in such a way that, God doesn't matter. Oh, he matters, right? It doesn't matter what people do. God matters. And he's seeing it and he's witnessing it all. And God has a come on himself, right? In verse 7. Don't miss that. Twice these folks say, come on, let's do this. Come on. And God says, come on. Let's do this. Let's get down and confuse this. Let's create a problem here. You see, that response by God says that everything that's happening in the first 4 verses of chapter 11, it is not good, and it's not God's intent. God's intent is not that people make a name for themselves. God's intent is not that we provide for our own fortune and we provide for our own security. God says, come on, let's confuse this. This needs a healthy dose of scattering, confusion. This is not good. Now, don't read this text and think, oh boy, God's acting like a threatened little dictator, right? I'm not letting this go on. I'm going to go down and poof and be done with this. He's not threatened at all. They are no rival to him in any way, shape, or form. What God is here is what he always is, what he has always been throughout the Bible up through this point and forward. He is a concerned father, right? A concerned father who steps in and says, I've got to stop this for their own good, right? God's not stopping this because he's threatened by them. There's nothing they can do to threaten him. Their life, their breath is in his hands. All God has to do is turn his back for a moment, it's over. No, he steps in for their own good. It's like when you take the keys away from your teenage child and they're driving. Right? They're messing up. They're going the wrong way. And what are you going to do as a father? You're taking the keys away. No, we're not going this direction any longer, right? We need to step back and take care of this. This is not good for you. That's God. That's his response here. God has done this at the Garden of Eden. He's done it at the flood. He's done it repeatedly, doing what is in the best interest, the long term for the human condition. And there are times where a dad has to step in and he says, no. This is stopping. We're going another direction out of concern. That's what he does. You will note here, by God's response, that this idea of a unity and a peace around godless living. Okay, now don't misunderstand what I'm saying. There's nothing wrong with unity and peace, but unity and peace around godless living is not good. It is not good for the whole world to be on the same page of godlessness. God says that's not good. Come on, we need to do something about it. And God, when he comes and he confuses this language, it is actually an act of mercy. He is cutting off this group of people on a course that is not good for them or for anybody else. And so God brings in a division. He brings in a breakup. He disrupts this unity and peace around godless living. And he brings a separation to stop this flood of evil. Right, God says, oh my, look at where this is going. If I don't step in now, where will it end? And so he steps in, stops this flood of rebellion and evil just like he stopped it before, but that time he did it with a flood. Let me make a couple of applications about this. Yeah, we're going to get off the runway here. One is corporate, worldwide, nationwide. The other is personal. Corporately, do you see how humanity can join together to conquer heaven? Join together in an attempt to achieve and or to conquer heaven, to thwart what God has put in place. And here's this group of people, and that's what they go after. They're going to ascend to heaven, right? They're going to stop in one place, and they're going to build this tower, and it's going to be a name for them, and it's going to go up to heaven. They're going to ascend, rather than what God said was, fill the earth. Now, obviously, you got to live someplace, and cities per se are not bad. But this godless construction, not of the physical, but of the group, this godlessness says, come on, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to be, and has nothing to do with God. God doesn't have a say in it. We're going to ascend versus following him and filling the earth. This making a name for ourselves. And the alternative to making a name for myself is to accept who God has created me to be. Right? I am created in his image. I'm given an identity. I'm given a relationship. I'm given a name, and I'm given a gender. No, I'm going to make a name for me. That's not good enough. God, you made me in your image. It's not good enough. I need to have some other source of meaning in my life. This idea that a group of people can get together, they can kind of become absolute. Right? They can become gods. We are the determiners now of what the absolutes are of life and what the meaning is. And if you wonder where I'm going with that, I'm talking about absolutes like there is no gender. There are no moral values. There are no sexual rights and wrong. The absolutes are that anything is okay. Whatever you want to believe, you believe. Those kind of absolutes. This is the group think that took place on this plane that God saw, and God said, no, this isn't good. A commentator, his name is Henry Bochet. He's a Frenchman, in case you wonder. I want to read to you from something he wrote back in the 50s. About a corporate mindset, this application to large groups of humanity. A theoretical and a practical system is worked out. Right? He's commenting on what took place there in Babel. A theoretical and a practical system is worked out. A language and a tower that will enclose everything. And once the system is completed, it will proclaim the autonomy of the human race, and it will determine completely the lives and the destinies of each individual. This tower is the system. And having become a collective enterprise, I got to stick to preaching the word, okay? Having become a collective enterprise, the sinful project takes on the face of totalitarianism, with technology and ideology as its means of realization. That this will take over technology, it will take over ideology, it will take over philosophy, it will take over thinking, and this is how it realizes its goal. If Genesis chapter 3 reveals the religious root of human evil, the Garden of Eden, Genesis 11 shows it in its most logical and perhaps most terrible political expression. Now that guy knew what he was talking about. And he saw what this has to say, and he saw where it takes us. This idea that there needs to be one world, one system, one government, no nations, one way of everything, consolidated and controlled by a group that says, come on, we'll tell you what we're going to do, and we'll tell you how we're going to do it, and we'll tell you where we're going, and these are the goals. And there's a whole lot of people that go, oh, thank you, I don't have to worry about anything. The truth is, you got to worry about everything, because that is a godless path, and it is a path to ruin. And God sees it. And God says that is not good. That idea, that kind of language we hear, it ought to send up red flags to us. It ought to grieve our spirits to think what is possible when humanity unites in godlessness. And God stopped it here. But it's going to happen again. The Bible says there's going to come a time where everybody's going to be under one individual. He is going to be a false Messiah. He's going to be a godless Christ. And he's going to fool a lot of people, and they're going to go right along with him. They're going to take his name, they're going to take his number, whatever he says, come on, they're going to do it. See, this ought to put a check in our soul in what we see and hear. So where does this text connect with today? Far more than here's Noah's family and here's how we got languages. Far deeper than that. It couldn't be more contemporary. It couldn't be than what we are seeing unfold in our world, in our nation today. I recently watched the movie Encanto, Disney's Encanto. Everybody was like, oh wow, it's a great movie, wins awards, great, right? So watched it. I watched that and I thought, oh my goodness. Here is this world, this culture, and here is this family, and they have all the gifts. It just occurred to me that maybe you haven't seen it and want to see it. Well, spoiler, plug your ears. If they have all the gifts, and they have the gifts of creation, they have the gifts of healing, they have the gifts of prophecy, and they reside and come not from God, but they're magically given to these people. And the rest of the town, the rest of the area, all comes under them. They need this family for everything. I watched that, I thought, you've got to be kidding me. Did they read Genesis 11 before they made the movie? This idea of what happened on this plain in Shinar is playing out afresh in our world. God is replaced by humanity. In humanity, we make a name for ourselves. We solve our problems. There is nothing we cannot do if we just unite. You heard that before? There's nothing we can't do. Right? We can take care of this virus. We can take care of poverty. We can take care of education. We just do what we say. I hope YouTube cuts me off for this. I would consider it an honor. This is what's happening. And if it didn't include Christians, I probably wouldn't be talking about it. But it includes Christians who just find their future, their security, not in God, right? But in somebody else. Somebody else says, come on, I'll take care of you. I'll give you what you need and I'll give you what you want. You just come along with me. There's a corporate application, but there's a personal application of this as well. You see, I can be my own microcosm of Genesis chapter 11. I can live in such a way that I'm building me. I'm not trying to build a collective of nations. No, it's I'm building me. I'm trusting myself. I'm going to succeed by my effort. I'm going to achieve personal and financial security because I'm afraid of the future. And it's not from God, it's not from His covenant, and it's not from faith. It's me doing me. I trust me. In us we trust, in me I trust. Whereas my identity is that I'm made in God's image. Right? There's something about me that reflects God. There's something about you that reflects God. And every individual has value based on they are a creation of God in His image. And there is where meaning and fulfillment is found. I have nothing to prove. You say, well, yeah, we know you don't. I've got nothing to prove. I just have to walk with God. And He takes care of all that. My security is not in me, it is in His faithfulness. It is in His power, and it is in His provision. God is very shortly going to call a man by the name of Abram, and we'll look at that in a couple of weeks. And He says, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make of you a great nation. I will multiply your descendants. And those who bless you, I'll bless. And those who curse you, I will curse. God says, I will take care of you. You find your identity in our relationship, in this calling. You go where I say. You settle where I say settle. I'll give you a land. You don't have to build your own. You have to make your own. Forget the bricks, forget the mortar, forget all that work and effort. This is where security is. And we pursue God's desires, right? Those are our pursuits. Not a name for ourselves. What do we pursue? Glory for God, right? That I want my life to glorify Him, not me. It couldn't be more clear. It couldn't be more black and white. that is outlined in these chapters. And here's the personal application. When you have to live in Genesis chapter 11 personally, where you're building your city, you're building your future, you're taking care of your security, you are one tired person. And I'm not talking about you need a nap. I'm talking about your soul. I'm talking about your heart. You're running scared. You're running scared. When the stock market drops, you drop. Right? When the economy shuts down, you shut down. Because God isn't your God. You're your God. Other people are your gods. Your whole future, your security is dependent on them. Rather than God saying, I'll never leave you nor forsake you. Jesus has something to say to us. He made a promise to a group of people, an invitation. He has a come on of his own. And I didn't write down the reference for this. You're just going to have to trust me that he said it. It's in the Bible. Jesus says, come to me. All of you who are laboring and heavy laden, or weary and burdened. That is, you're working at your own security. It's not that you put in 12 hours a day on your job. It's that you are laboring to achieve your own success and your own security. You're working to solve the problems of life, or you're burdened. Other stuff is being piled on you. Other people are asking you to solve all of their problems. And so some of it is self-induced by what you do. Some of it is just the junk that comes from human beings being human beings. He says, why don't you come to me? This group says, come on, let's do this. Let's do this. Come on. God says, come on, let's get down there and mess this up. And Jesus says, why don't you come this way? If you're laboring and heavy laden, he says, why don't you take my yoke upon you? Why don't you step into a yoke where you're here and I'm right here? And you let me lead you. Take my yoke upon you. He says, learn about me. Learn about me. My yoke is easy, he says. And my burden is light. He said, you'll find rest for your soul. See, Jesus has something to say to us about himself and about his way and about what he desires. And you know what? If you're going to step into that, if you're going to follow his come on, and we're all following one of them, right? We're either listening to the come on of the world, or we're listening to the come on of God. We're listening to one of those two. And to listen to the one of God, to get into that yoke, we got to step out of something else. It's going to require us to step in to his terms and say no to ours. I'm going to stop building. I'm going to stop driving. I'm going to stop running. I'm tired of establishing my own life and my own future, especially when we don't need to. When he says, I'll be your God, you be my people. Fill the earth, scatter it. I give it all to you. Don't worry. No, that's not good enough. I've got to have control. Jesus says, why don't you give that up? Just give it up. That is almost always the message of the Bible to everybody in every situation. Quit it. Give it up. Surrender. Dump your life before God. Just dump it out and say, I'm done. I'm done. I'm tired. It's over. White flag. No more. You. I want to go your way. I got some learning to do of you in your yoke, because I sure don't have rest. And this isn't very easy. It requires us to change. And this group of people refused. They refused. They refused. They pursued. They pursued. They pursued. Sooner or later, God is going to come down. He's going, yeah, I see what's going on here. This is enough. They got scattered. You pursue this way long enough, and you're going to run into resistance from God. You're going to scatter your life, right? It'll be a mess. It'll be a problem. And the solution is to start listening to him. is to come back and go the way he has asked. So if you are wrestling with this on an individual level, I remind you of the invitation of Jesus Christ. It is an offer of mercy. It is an offer of grace. He says, come on. Come on. Take my yoke upon you. You need to relearn. You need to relearn. That is a very kind and gracious offer. He doesn't say, no, look, before you get in this, you got a bunch of stuff to straighten out, you big dope. That's not what he does. No, come on. The way this gets straightened out is walking with him, learning of him. That's the way it gets straightened out. Yeah. That's who he is. This is what he died on the cross for. Yeah. Let's pray.